December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
On this fateful Sunday morning, a young Allentown, Pennsylvania man witnessed history unfold before his eyes. Richard Schimmel enlisted in the service in the summer of 1941. He was part of a small, newly formed unit of radar operators. Radar stands for radio detection and ranging.
When they said they were going to put me into radar, which nobody knew what radar was at that time. It was nothing, you know.
In fact, it was so new that the men didn't have a name or belong to a branch of the service.
We were so new, we didn't belong to anybody. We were just signal aircraft warning. For a while they thought that we were going to be in the Air Force. They didn't know where we were going to go. So, but we ended up, when the war started, we were only up like a year. We never had an insignia. We never had anything like that. You know what I mean?
Wow.
To this day, I don't know what the heck we were. Tell you the truth.
A radar operator's job was to monitor the radar, operate the switchboard, exchange messages, and plot any airplanes that flew overhead.
I did everything from decoding messages, you know, and stuff like that.
The first working radar was invented by British scientist Sir Robert Watson Watt in 1935. He wanted to invent something that would help prevent his country from being attacked due to the impending threat of war. By 1939, there were radar stations all over England.
August the 14th, England gave radar to the United States. I enlisted August the 28th.
Hawaii was the first place the U.S. military planned to use radar.
And so I was sent to Hawaii, and I was one of the first people to go over to Hawaii for radar.
Because England was in the midst of fighting their own battles, they could not supply any personnel to travel overseas and teach the men how to erect and operate radar.
Finally, when they sent us one, we didn't know how to put it together. So by hook or crook, we finally got it together. We got it working. We put up like a rector said, you put the red bay on where it said red, green. That's how we put it together. We didn't know what we were doing.
Believe it or not, radar was not allowed to be in operation on Sundays. However, on the morning of December 7th, 1941, there happened to be a young radar operator by the name of George Elliott practicing at the Opana Point radar station. He was being instructed by Private Joe Lockard. Suddenly, at 7:02 a.m., Elliott encountered what he claimed to be the largest blip either of us had ever seen on an oscilloscope.
He picked up these Japanese planes on the radar, but he wasn't sure who they were, but we didn't know who they were. Joe Lockard, he went and checked it out, and he called into the information center, is where I worked. I was off because I was relieved by the Joe McDonald.
The phone was answered by Private Joe McDonald, who informed Lockard that the other plotters, including Mr. Schimmel, had already left. McDonald assured Elliott that he would have the lieutenant call them back. At 7:20 a.m., Lieutenant Kermit Tyler called the Opana Point radar station and was answered by Joe Lockard.
We were sending bombers in from the United States, and he thought they were them. But I always thought if they knew that these bombers were coming from the west and these other planes were coming from the east, they should have had some of the other radars look into it. But they never did.
Assuming that this was what the men were seeing, he quickly dismissed the claims, remarking, "Well, don't worry about it."
He should have thought a little bit too, but he was young too, you know.
35 minutes later, at 7:55 a.m., Commander Logan Ramsey looks out his window at the command center at Ford Island. He noticed a plane dipping close to the ground. He then saw something black fall out of the plane, identifying it as a bomb. He immediately ordered a telegraph sent out to every naval base and ship that read, "Air raid on Pearl Harbor. This is no drill.
Joe McDonald came up and said to me, "Shim, the Japs are coming."
So you were in your tent then, right?
Yeah, sleeping. Yeah.
Okay. So you weren't aware that it was the Japanese at first?
Not at that time. No. First, we went up on top of the mess hall, up on the roof to get a better look. What we would do, we'd see the airplanes, and then we'd see nothing, and then all of a sudden we'd see the smoke. Then they start shooting behind us, and we got the hell down there fast.
During the attacks, Mr. Schimmel helped out as much as he could. Where did you go as soon as you were notified about the attacks?
Right down where I'm supposed to be working, down in the main filter center, where we did all the plotting and everything.
So how did you help out there?
I did anything I had to do. I knew the job pretty well. I could do almost anything. You know, I just helped out.
Mr. Schimmel also helped out with the wounded at Pearl Harbor.
We helped over at the hospital, you know, carry some of the people in, and that was it.
Some believe that the reason that we were attacked was because we had placed an oil embargo on Japan.
We had stopped selling oil to them, and they needed oil, you know. They don't have no oil.
So do you think that's one of the reasons they may have?
That could have been it.
The person-to-person exchange that is made possible by radar may seem obvious, but there is a much greater example of exchange throughout history. Radar was a stepping stone for television and other means of communication as we know it today. It also opened the gateway to establish new means of military communication. The Pearl Harbor radar operators explored the newly developed world of radar, which was unheard of at the time. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the island of Oahu encountered enemy planes diving and bombing from all directions. The radar operator's job was to plot planes and operate the switchboard, which meant answering phones and exchanging messages. The wider view of exchange in radar can be seen in today's communication devices such as television.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Each and every person who has contributed to the war effort has a unique perspective that should be heard and recognized for the important role they played in protecting our country's freedom. Mr. Schimmel proudly and graciously shares the story of his important role in the history of radar and the events of World War II. However, we must never forget the events of December 7th, 1941.
Remember Pearl Harbor, day and night, pray and fight, carry on.